Sorry about that. Had the dryer running. I didn't want people to hear it. But Keith, welcome to the podcast again. We're gonna call this take 2 because people don't know they won't know the after the fact. But yeah, so we're doing the episode in my apartment right now. So it's funny because the dryer's right there. But yeah, anyways, so Keith, we'll start with the trivia question, which you already know the answer to. What is Maryland state soil?
Sassafras.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I think I gave the answer correctly the first time, so I did, I swear.
So go back to earlier what you were talking about. So we were talking about regenerative agriculture, and we were talking about how your family started. So retell the story about your grandfather and how their farm got started with the dairy real quick, just so people understand.
Yeah, so historically, as far back as we can trace, over 400 years back into Germany, our family's been involved in farming. And we came over to the United States in, I think, 1741 on a ship named the Friendship, landed in Philadelphia, ended up in Berks County. I believe they were some type of indentured where they had to work off their time. But anyway, so we had the farm in the family up until my grandparents on my dad's side. And in 57, there was an accident. The fuel truck had come, and my grandfather must have got gasoline on his hands and wiped them on his bibs. And anyway, when he started up the tractor, a spark came off the muffler and lit him on fire. And so he burned from his crotch up to his chin, and he ended up in the hospital. They had to graft skin off his back and his legs and everything for his chest. And back in 57, it was a whole different process then, so it wasn't as good. It's not a good thing, but I mean, it wasn't as streamlined as it is now. And anyway, so he was out of commission for several years, but he came home Halloween that year. And then I think it was in April of the next year, the barn caught fire, and they got the cows out. But then when the fire truck came, the siren scared the cows. They're creatures of habit. They ran back in the barn, and half of them died in the fire. Well, then they didn't get a full payment, so they took the money that they got for the fire, and they bought livestock to bring in, and they used a pole barn. And the reason why the pole barn is important to the story is supposedly, they can, by contacting each other, they can transfer this disease. Yeah. So in the pole barn, they were more likely to rub noses and, have interaction with each other. Well, anyway, some of the livestock that they brought in had a disease called brucellosis, and it's a highly contagious disease. The state quarantined the farm, and it does a bunch of stuff, but anyway, it caused the cows to calve early, and they're not ready, and the babies usually don't survive, is my understanding, the calves. And so anyway, so with those three things hitting the family in such short succession, they were able to make it about 5 years. But by the time all said and done, they were going to end up getting sheriff sailed, and they worked out a deal that if they did a quick sale, they wouldn't do that. So that was the end of the family farm in our family. Well, then my dad worked as a herdsman for 2 other dairies. The rest of the family went on to work at other farms and for what ended up becoming Agway up in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
In our county, they worked there. And so when I came along in 69, we didn't have a farm anymore, but the whole family was still involved in farming. I still had relatives that had farms, mainly dairy, but they always had other stuff. My grandmother had geese, they had pigs. Every year we'd all get together and butcher. That was when the family still got together and butchered, and then everybody get a share of the meat. But I loved the outdoors. I loved farming. And so one of the things that I always had kind of in the back of my mind was I wanted to do it. So I worked on my neighbors' farms to help them out. But one of the things that quickly became apparent to me, so earlier this week, I did a program for the Ag Biz Masters for Farm Credit. I participated in their program, the 2-year program, a couple of years ago, and they asked me back as alumni to do a presentation. And I was sharing with them that one of the things that quickly became apparent at the time, I was working for $2 an hour, and I was doing hay for my neighbors for $2 a wagon. I'd unload the wagon, I get $2, And that was how I was making money. Well, my great uncle bought a farm. I think it was 50 or 60 acres. It wasn't a large place, but it was something like $385,000. And at that time in that area, that was unheard of. People were flipping out. How could he pay that much money and all this kind of stuff? But all I knew that was when I figured out the $2 an hour, it worked out that it would take me 96 and a quarter years at $2 an hour working all year long to be able to afford a farm like that. So it quickly became apparent to me that I had to figure some way to make money because there was no way I was going to be able to keep working on a farm and end up being able to afford a farm.
Right.
So essentially I tried to do every single thing I could figure out to be able to make more money. I had always enjoyed forestry. I'd thought about becoming a forest ranger, but a cousin of mine who was a lot older actually did, and hardly made any money, couldn't find a job. It was the 80s, if you remember, the dairy buyout and farm aid.
I don't remember.
Well, you might not remember, but some folks that might listen might. And bad economic times, especially in the farming community. That's when Willie Nelson, did farm aid and those kinds of things. And anyway, so I ultimately became a cabinet maker. Then I went back to college. Then I worked different jobs. I ended up going back to school again, getting my ship's officer's license in the Merchant Marine. I worked out on the ship for a while. I worked for the Navy as a contract specialist down at the Navy Yard for Military Sealift Command. Military Sealift Command is the company that carries a lot of our United States Merchant Marine used to carry it, but then MSC carries a lot of the war materials. So in Iraq, we had the Iraqi war, those types of things. Military Sealift Command carried the equipment for that. And so I worked for them for a while. I went back out to sea, worked out there for a while, but ultimately I loved my wife. I married her because I loved her. I wanted to spend time with her, and we wanted to have kids.
I would hope you marry your wife because you love her.
Well, there are a lot of sailor marriages don't end well.
I remember
it's a rough life if you're away 9 months out of the year, year at a time, 6 months out of the year. And so I didn't want to end up that way, so I came back and ultimately I worked in real estate. I had found I had a knack for houses, and anyway, then had a little blacksmith and woodworking shop during that time. And then in 2009, we were finally able to afford our first place in Montgomery County. It was 10 acres. And then a few years later, we moved up to Howard County, where we are now.
Where in Montgomery County were you at the time?
It was just in the Ag Reserve up in the western end, right outside of Laytonsville.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so then we ended up coming to Howard County, and we have 22 and a third acres, but it cost $869,000 to get that. So that was, we had to get the money together to be able to do that. And your mom was actually the first person that I met, and we pulled in at the farm, and I was telling her all that I wanted to do and everything. And she was very nice about everything.
Keith, just get up on that mic.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. I'm just making sure people.
I don't want to blow people's ears out. I know I have a loud voice.
I can control it over here. So
oh, okay. All right. But so yeah, and then what I had wanted to do, so I knew from growing up in the community, we weren't Amish or Mennonite, but we certainly worked with enough folks in that vein that I knew what was possible with animal power. I knew from history what was possible, because obviously we're all here. So back, 500 years ago, the vets weren't coming. They weren't giving anybody shots. They weren't doing any of that. We didn't have, what we see now as fertilizer and the ability to spread things and buy things. We didn't have the engine power that we have now. And yet, miraculously, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people got fed, and it worked in a good system. So, we know it worked. So how did it work if, can we still do that stuff, or can't we do it anymore? So one of the things I wanted to do personally was I wanted to create essentially a Garden of Eden that was on the farm, that was integrated, where we not only had things that were producing for money, but also had things that took into account the natural environment and kept it as good as possible. When I was a kid, now this was, I predate GMO and, those things. When I was a kid, and I don't know if you guys had bug deflectors when you were a kid, but the big thing for a while was all my buddies, we were getting bug deflectors for our vehicles. Because I had to clean my windshield off with, by hand, scrub it off about once a week because you had so much dead bugs on the windows you drive around. I hardly ever have to clean my windshield. Dust I clean my windshield with, but hardly ever bugs anymore,
where you're at now.
Yeah, where we are now. When I was a kid, I think we might have had one person in my class that had allergies. And now, probably almost everybody in my daughter's classes have allergies, of some type, And I don't know what's causing that, but all I know is things were different. So is it the way we're raising our food? Is it connected in some way? I don't know. But what I wanted to see from an economic side is if I don't need all those other inputs, if I can cover more of the inputs on the farm, because the Great Depression was a big impact on the family. And plus, we were part of the German groups that came over looking for religious freedom. And so they were used to having wars roll across Europe and have all sorts of problems. And so they were very frugal. And, how do you bankrupt the Pennsylvania Dutchman that never threw anything out? I mean, when I helped my grandmother, I lived with my grandmother for 4.5 years when she got older after my grandfather died. And I mean, she saved tinfoil and newspapers and saran, the plastic wrap. How do you bankrupt somebody that did that, but yet it was happening? You had people that never threw anything out, that were very frugal, and they were going out of business. So I was trying to take all these lessons that I learned through what I knew about history, what I knew about our history, and we composted since I can remember. Mm-hmm. We had a compost pile at the house. When we would do food preparation, we didn't have the livestock, our own, because we didn't have the farm at that point. But, we'd fill a big pan with all the cutoffs of the vegetables and everything else, and we'd carry it down and feed it to the neighbor's steers, down in the field. So we were, we had that mentality of how can you use it? How can you get it worked out there? There was a mushroom plant up by our, outside of town. And every year we'd go up and get mushroom soil. My grandmother would get mushroom soil for a garden, So there was a lot of thought into that. And then as a ship's officer and touring around the world and visiting all these other countries, I was looking for what was working, what wasn't, what were things that they were doing where it was low input or, that they could do on their own. And so a lot of that stuff was circling around in my head. And by the time we got our place, then I started to come across some different authors like Joel Salton, who had Polyface Farm out in Virginia, and I'd go visit, and they had, books that he wrote and books that he recommended, and then books that I read. Other people then recommended other books, and I started to find other organizations. And I came across Future Harvest. So I started going to their conferences, PASA, up in Pennsylvania, Acres, the Livestock Conservancy. And I started to slowly just put all this stuff together. But the challenge was that a lot of the knowledge wasn't integrated. So
what do you mean by that?
Well, so if you went to the University of Maryland and you asked the wildflower experts about wildflowers, they could tell you anything you want to know about wildflowers except how to graze cattle on them and were they toxic or were they safe? Was there an issue? Did we have to be worried about anything? If you went to the forage experts, they could tell you anything you want to know about forage, but they couldn't tell you, well, what if you added wildflowers into the mix? So the one side couldn't tell you how to graze them. The other side couldn't tell you what the wildflowers did. And not that that's bad or not. It's just a matter of there's a gap there. So now, well, how does someone make an economic decision that I'm going to do this on my farm if you don't have some guidelines as to what might work? You run the risk of failing. And, if you're in a financially poor position, well, you could lose the whole farm.
So are you talking about it from a perspective though of farming the way that you do versus like from a
Yeah. I mean, as I was looking, I'm looking at myself going, I have a finite life expectancy, and some of this stuff can take years to put into practice. Like a lot of the tree plantings that we did, well, 10, 15 years until they might be useful for production, or, even longer if I'm looking for timber or building materials, that kind of thing, firewood. And so I was trying to figure out, well, how can I do this quickly and in an efficient manner? But also how, Colby was on the other week talking about, farming with money and farming for money.
Yeah.
And while I understand what he's saying there, the challenge is for folks who didn't have a farm and wanted to do it. Well, I had to get the money. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't farm for money with no farm. So I had to go out, make the money, and then start somewhere and come in. So then I was farming with money because, well, I had to. I didn't have any other option, So,
well, I think
I know what he meant.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's when you're looking at folks that are interested in becoming a farmer, sometimes there's a point of view. Well, they're looked down upon because they're not farmers yet. They're just farming with money. But the issue is, well, they didn't have any other choice. They had to get the money in order to be able to do it.
I mean, I'm not even technically a farmer, and like the reason that I'm still involved in agriculture is because you're exactly right. Like I would love to have a farm one day, but I'm not going to go out there and start pulling out $5 million worth of loans to justify to start something that is going to put me in an unfair advantage, position wise versus somebody who got to inherit the farm. And I'm not saying that they necessarily have like a better hedge. They do and they don't, but it's more of the fact that I'm not willing to put myself in that position. So I get what you're saying, that you had to work prior to the fact to even fulfill the dream that you were trying to do, right?
Right. And so what helped in that aspect, and that's something that I try again in whatever way I can, but like with the program that I did with Ag Bizmasters earlier in the week, I think all farms should be farming with money. I'd love to see all farms profitable and everybody's making a good living and they have enough, because I feel like a lot of times if the fear of making a mistake and of losing that money, if you're right on the edge, you're living, paycheck to paycheck as a farmer, and you can't afford a crop failure, or you can't afford to not be able to make that payment, well, you're less likely to try and experiment and be innovative then, because if you don't want to lose everything. And oftentimes some of the folks, like me, you have a heritage, and the last thing you want to be known as is the one that lost the family farm.
Yeah.
Either whether externally or internally, no one might blame you, but internally you might be like, oh, did I fail? Well, we know from mental health and stuff, and we can talk about it later if you want, but there's a lot of folks that have struggled through that, where they lost, they were running the farm when it went out of business, and it can be a traumatic, event that they might not get over, So anyway, so what I had to do was I had to make sure we had our finances right before I went in. But what that did in a good way was it also gave us these other revenue streams that then if something happened, I could make a mistake. I could get something wrong. Now, I make tons of mistakes. I don't know, you might not remember the old Army commercial. We do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. And I always joke and say I make more mistakes before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. So I'm not saying I don't make any mistakes, but the mistakes that I made were small or didn't ruin us financially. They were recoverable mistakes. But I had to put those pieces together. So long hours on the Cornell site, looking at what different wildflowers and what different plants might be toxic for the livestock and what we should stay away from, what trees to plant, how to do it. So I stopped counting at 20,000 trees when we got over how many we had planted. We probably have closer to 30,000, I'd say, on the farm. Some are going to be a living hedge. Some are going to be for production. Some are meant to produce like honey locusts, where they produce these nutritious pods that the livestock can eat. Some are meant for tree hay, some are meant for seeds, some are meant for timber. So then we can use the wood that comes off of them for our wood stove for heat. We can use some of them for mulch. We use mulch for our roads. We use mulch for the trees. We use mulch for deep bedding the livestock. Then we can use some of it for making charcoal, which we mix the charcoal in with compost, and then we make what's called biochar. I was at a biochar burn just before I came here today with Howard Eco Works out in Howard County for a couple of hours, and so we try to integrate that, and then we mix that up into compost, mix it. We make biochar. We spread that out on the fields. We have dung beetles. We have earthworms, about 25 or so per square foot. The soil's really healthy. We participate in the soil health benchmark study with Future Harvest and PASA, and so our soil health continues to improve. So it's water holding capacity, the fertility that it involves, and so then we do rotational grazing. The livestock are getting the benefit of those nutrients. We're also moving them, so if they have parasites, all of our livestock have low-level parasites, but it doesn't overwhelm them.
Yeah. And
so we have heritage breed Irish Dexter cattle, and so we rotate them across. So by the time something comes out, when the larva emerges and goes to reinfect the host, well, the herd's not there. There's nothing to reinfect. So the herd is continuing to move forward and graze across. We graze across the whole property. It might take 2 months to bring them back to the same spot. That's fine. By then, that area is better again. It doesn't have the same level of parasite activity. We keep the grasses high so that when it rains, it slows the water drops down. If you've ever seen a water droplet hitting the bare soil in a video, it looks like a nuclear explosion. Mm-hmm. So then that slows down, spreads it out, and gives it more chance to soak into the soil profile. Then we have what we call keylines. It's a swale and berm system that takes water that wants to concentrate by gravity in the valleys, and it takes it and it spreads it back out to the ridges to give it a chance to soak in. And then on top of that, we have mulch and we have the trees planted. So we're watering all our trees at the same time. And then it's helping give that water a chance to go into the soil. We had Ray Weil from University of Maryland come out to see if we could do a runoff study, and he said, "You're not going to have any runoff." And I haven't had any runoff, so they didn't do a study because he said, we got to go to a place that's going to actually have runoff. And the idea is to drive that water. I had one guy say, "Well, isn't that selfish, you keeping all that water?" And I said,
what did he mean by, what does he mean by selfish?
The guy thought I was, stealing water and taking it and keeping it from people downstream, that I was keeping the water on my property and not letting anybody else have it. And I had to say, no. I said, what we're doing is we're trying to get it to go into the soil profile, get cleaned up, get in the aquifer. We're replenishing the aquifer. We're keeping the moisture that we need to grow and have the plants be healthy and keep that microbial activity working. We aren't stealing it from our neighbors.
Yeah.
What we don't want it concentrating, speeding up, picking up soil, nutrients, fertilizer, washing it into the stream, killing critters or making it worse for the bay, So
before you go a little further, go back to when you were talking a little bit earlier about, so that compared to where you are today, because we're talking a lot about like the things you are able to do on your farm today. Talk about that. From that first year where you started, where you had to start basically from scratch to create this vision of what you wanted, you called it a Garden of Eden, concept. Talk about like the comparison from that to where you are now, and like maybe explain some of the challenges you had to go through along the way to get there, because obviously like a lot of the things I hear, especially about like the practices that you're trying to do, it's very much more labor intensive.
Well, I'll tell you to be honest, I gave you that little thing there of things that I had done, goals and stuff. And, I had always said, 10 to 100 acres. Well, I have to say with the way we manage our 22, that's about the max I could handle.
Yeah.
You know, as one person trying to work the whole thing all the time, all the different systems.
How did you figure that? Like, was there like a calculation you did?
That was in my head. You know, historically, our family farms have usually been about 150 acres, you know, in Pennsylvania.
Right.
You know, pre my grandparents and pre time frames. But the 22 1/3, that was the best farm we could find. And that was the most acreage that was available at the time that we could find. That was a really good farm. And that was all we could afford. You know, that was, you know, that's a lot of money. And, anyway.
When did you buy the farm? When was that?
We bought it in 2012 and we had to renovate the house as my mom was still alive then and she couldn't do stairs and all the bedrooms were upstairs. So we put in a handicap accessible first floor bedroom and everything. And so it took a few months to do that. So we ended up moving in August of 13. I moved the livestock up in the winter of 13, but we came up then later.
What was the farm previously before you moved in there? What was it previously?
So it was originally, it was subdivided off back in 73 from the Warfield farm. And I don't remember which Warfield. There were a lot of Warfields over there, but anyway, I forget which one.
Just like there's a lot of Zimmermans up in
exactly. You know the deal. And anyway, then it was owned by the Bros. They had dog kennels there. They raised German Shepherds. And then it went to the Mundys, and then we bought it from them. So we were the third owner. It was put into preservation, I think, in 1994, in the Howard County Ag Preservation Program, not the MALF program, but the Howard County one. And so it had been primarily rented out to our neighbors. The Nils had it, I think since the early 2000s anyway. And they did, I think earlier they had done maybe some corn and soybeans, the records seemed to indicate, from FSA, but for the longest time they'd used it to make hay.
Yeah.
And so the Mundys had horses. They had added a horse barn onto the dog kennel area, and then they would charge them 200 bales of hay a year for rent. And that was how they got hay for their horses.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And so when we came on, well, that was our deal. And then I had let them know when we bought the property that I was going to take it over for farming. And they're very nice. I love, you know, the Nils. Pete and Danny are great folks. And I still work with them to buy hay every year, you know, from their place. I buy hay in for the winter time. But anyway, so it was a blank slate. It was just what I call the old barn, which was the horse stall barn, and a shop, an area that they used to park their cars, and then the house. And so I brought over a blacksmith shop that I had, a run-in shed, a chicken coop. And then we built an equipment shed that it's 40 by 60 with a 20-foot lean-to, and our sawmill is under there now.
Right.
And then we built another 40 by 60 that has a 20-foot. So they're both 60 by 60, but there's 20 foot of it as a lean-to out the side. And that's where we do hay storage. And that's where we did lambing when we needed to, because what we were getting was the springs, you know, like I'm worried right now, our February was so warm, but then it seems like we get February temperatures in March and April and it's so cold and it's so wet. And so we'd actually start having challenges with lambing and calving because, you know, they just couldn't get warm and dry. So we built that building to be able to do hay storage, but also be able to put the animals in if we needed them to be able to have their young in a dry, warm environment. So anyway, so those are some of the things that we added. But the first thing I needed was a fence. And it was funny, they were doing the fracking up in Pennsylvania at the time. And so my understanding of the situation was that Pennsylvania was not allowed, and a lot of the states that were doing it, were not allowing to put concrete down. They wanted to put heavy timber on. So my understanding is the majority of the East Coast sawmills switched over to high dollar value lumber for logs for the oil industry. So because we weren't organic certified, I wasn't going for organic certified, but I was trying to avoid pressure treated lumber, that sort of thing for the soil. We were going with black locust. Well, we needed 475 posts. We couldn't get enough anywhere on the East Coast. They quoted me $6 a post. We went up $25 a post.
That they were buying from you, or
that they were going to buy for me.
Yeah.
To use for our project.
Okay.
And they couldn't find them anywhere. couldn't find them even at $25 a post. We just couldn't get them. So we had to go with metal. We actually went with metal posts. Had the same life expectancy. They look fancier, they're not, and so I get teased every now and then about my fancy fencing, but I'm like, hey man, it's all I had. And we had to get the cows, in for something. So anyway, so we started, it was just hay fields, orchard grass and Timothy. And, the first thing we did was we put in the keylines, because that's kind of the swale and berm system is kind of like the first level of the overlay for water management. So we laid those out in 13 in September. And then I had done a program out at Mark Shepard's farm. He wrote the book Restoration Agriculture, and he had a permaculture design course that he did out there at his New Forest farm for 10 days. So I camped out in my truck for 10 days out there in the driftless region of Wisconsin, and learned a lot, and anyway, then we came back, then we started planting trees, and the first 25 we planted, we did the stakes, we did the tree tubes, and I thought, well, let's see how this goes with grazing amongst them. Well, that was a bad idea, because the cows would scratch their heads on the stakes and bust them off and then eat the tree down to the ground. So I'm like, all right, well, that was a failed experiment. We wanted to see if we could get away with it. Nope, couldn't get away with that. So then we had to come up with, well, we gotta fence these trees out so that they'll survive. So then the next we had to do, once we had the external fencing up finally, then we had to go and do the internal fencing. And so we have about, I think it's 21 different areas that have what I'll call semi-permanent fencing. So that's fencing that I wouldn't move readily. It's going to be there for the long haul, say maybe 10 years. But then within that, we have other fencing that's movable, that we can move and adjust the size of the paddocks however we want.
Yeah.
So the goal is to try and rotate them all the way around the whole property within a year. So then we had to get gates. And so what happens with the herd in the rotational grazing, the way we do it,
explain how, just a quick, like if you had a definition of what rotational grazing is, like what would you say defines it? Or I guess the purpose of it before you get.
Well, I think the ultimate goal is you're trying to mimic the way wild animals moved across the landscape before we had fences and, everybody had a property. So like, pre-settlers pre-Europeans coming to North America type situation. But you're trying to do it within obviously a pre-described property boundary, so our land is what we're rotationally grazing on. And so you're using fencing, the predators would essentially follow these herds. And so you're using fencing in essentially a way to try and keep everybody moving. And so we'll graze to a certain height. I usually try to keep it above 8 inches. We'll graze that top portion off. We move them to the next spot. You keep giving them grass. That allows enough leaf matter on the plant for it to explode back out into growth if the weather conditions are agreeing. And so, that way then, like I said, the parasites that are back, it seems to help keep the animals healthier, which cuts down on vet bills, because vets are expensive. They do a good job, but they're expensive. And so, so in our system.
Is that like proven that you feel like you spend a lot less on vet bills overall with what you're doing?
Oh my gosh. I hardly see a vet.
Why?
I hardly need them at all.
Really?
The only time if I call him out because I want help castrating, I'll call those guys out to help me.
Right.
But yeah, I can't think of the last time I had an issue with one of the cattle that I needed a vet for.
And what type of cattle are you running?
They're Irish Dexter cattle, so they're a smaller breed, but I've loved them. I found out about them. I was down in Costa Rica. I was doing an education broad program with Penn State down in Puerto Rico, and over spring break we went to Costa Rica.
Yeah,
and they in the literature down there they call them the mini vacas, Spanish for cow, because they were having at that point in time. Now, Costa Rica is well known now for their conservation efforts, but at the time they were losing a lot of rainforest to the beef industry. They were cutting these areas down and then grazing it, the farmers. And what they found was they could raise a lot more animals of these Irish Dexters per acre. So there was a big push there. That's when I first saw an article on them. I fell in love with them. And so my goal had always been I wanted to get Irish Dexter cattle when I had the chance. And so anyway, so we've done a lot with different heritage breeds, and we can talk about that too sometime. But anyway, so
when you say heritage breed, what does that mean? A heritage breed, I guess.
Well, if you're saying a traditional dairy, you're probably looking at Holstein animals, for your production milk. But 1,000 years ago, every region had its own ecosystem of cattle that were genetically perfect for that area.
Isle of Jerseys, for example, where Jersey cattle came from.
Ayrshire, Guernseys,
Isle of Guernsey, I think, was Guernseys, if I remember correctly. I know dairy. So
so that's why I'm sharing, and so, but what would happen is, you didn't have, like if you look at some of the African nations and the breeds of cattle they have, perfect for those areas, perfect for those environments. But what happened, and it's all right, it's just what happened is as you started to move away and more into a production type, high production type stuff.
Keith, just get on that mic.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
you end up, you're a lot of those breeds that used to be just local. They didn't have breed associations and you weren't registered and whatever else. They started to literally go extinct because if you're not raising them, if you're not using them, well, then they will go. And we've lost, hundreds of domesticated species, over the years that just went out of favor and people stopped raising them. And so the breeds died.
What's an example one you can think of off the top of your head?
That's a good question.
I mean, I don't have my phone, but you can look it up.
I'll I raised for a little while small Beltsville white turkeys, and they were the breed was essentially created here in Beltsville, Maryland, because what they found was that the larger turkeys couldn't fit in the smaller ovens in the apartments in the cities. And so they bred the small Beltsville white. And it was its own breed for the longest time. But what they found when they did the broad-breasted whites was that all they did was they just butchered them sooner, so they were a smaller bird.
Yeah.
And it fit just fine, just like the small Beltsville whites. So that breed started to fall out of favor. And it may now be extinct. I raised them for a little while. They might be gone now. I had a lot of challenge trying to find them, but I'd have to look. They're one of the ones covered under the Livestock Conservancy, but that's a more recent example. But anyway, so with our system, we used equip money to get fences, to fence out the trees.
What's equip money?
So
yeah.
Yep.
I tried it.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So National Resource Conservation Service Environmental Quality Incentive Program, I think, is EQIP. And CSP is, I think, Conservation Steward Program. I might have the CSP one.
So they're all different programs to NRCS.
They're different programs that you can apply. You go to your soil conservation district, and you can get help with NRCS and be able to do programs that'll help you with cost share. Now, sometimes they'll pay a significant portion, sometimes just a smaller portion, but it's to help you do these different programs, or do these different practices on your farm. So we used equip money to put in water lines. And so the way we laid out the water lines and the way we laid out the paddocks were essentially within a 200-foot hose run of just about anywhere on the property from the hydrants that we put in. We put in 15 frost-free hydrants and I think 3,100 feet of water line. And so when we rotate, we take a shelter, mineral feeder, the water troughs, and that all moves with the herd. So in some systems, you'll have a centralized watering area. The challenge with that is that area can get soaked with urine, manure, water, just because, it's the nature of the beast when they're drinking, and it can become a disease vector. So if you're constantly going back to that same spot, well, then they can be picking up stuff there. So with our system, we can move it anywhere we need. And so we use that for things that we don't want, like, say, Canada thistle. So if I have a patch of Canada thistle that I want to...
Why would you not want Canada?
No, I know. So there are certain noxious weeds in Maryland that you're not allowed to go to seed. And so you're always trying to avoid having them on your property. But in the case where, like with us, we're trying not to spray, we have to come up with another way to do it. So you can either graze it. So one of the things that our livestock do is they eat Canada thistle. So that's the first thing I can do is run them on. But in general, the whole property likes to go to seed about the same time. There's a little bit of variation, in various corners, but in general. So because you're rotationally grazing and you're trying to keep the plants at a certain level and a certain production, you got to be careful because you may have stuff start to go to seed here. Well, if I can't graze them because we're not ready in the cycle, I could mow it, but then I won't have any grass there for them to eat. We can make hay off of it if we want. We could do that. But there's challenges there. So what I can do is I can sprinkle some seed down of what I want there.
Mm-hmm.
So say a clover or, another grass that I'm interested in. And then park a hut over there, park a water trough near it, put the mineral feeder there. Livestock will come to do what they normally do. And they're stomping it into the ground. They're planting those seeds.
Thistle, you mean?
What?
The Canada thistle or something? Or
yeah. So if I put the mineral feeder over an area of Canada thistle and I sprinkle clover seed down, well, while they're coming up to get their mineral, they're going to munch on some thistle. They're going to stomp some thistle down. They're also going to push that seed into the ground and plant it for me. So by the time we move that down the road the next time, I've gotten that patch under control. And so then we're rotating. So we're opening and closing gates and moving them around as we do. The other thing that we do, is we keep the young on the moms. So the way cattle learn is they're watching the adults and what the mom's eating. And, Fred Provenza, I was just at a presentation with him for the Maryland Grazers Network. It was back in the middle of January, beginning of January. And anyway, there's
Maryland Grazers Network. Is that like a article media company or?
No, it's an organization within the state of Maryland where you can come and learn. I'm a mentor in the program. My mentor was Ron Holter of Holter Home Farms, out by Jefferson, Maryland. And, they do a lot of this grazing work with all different sorts of animals.
Okay.
And so a lot of the grass-fed dairies, grass-fed organic dairies, are members of that group. So anyway, Fred Provenza was talking about how there's the science that he studied in his research, that even in vitro, these livestock are learning the flavors of these different things that the mother's eating. And so anyway, so we leave them on. They stay with the herd, with the mother, with their family unit, and so that saves time and money. I don't have to worry about weaning. I don't have to, separate them, have different areas. We don't have to hand feed them. Now, obviously, we're not a dairy operation, so we're not trying to get the milk production off of them. But anyway, so that helps then. And usually within, we always laugh, like right now we're getting into calving, and so the calves are usually hiding somewhere and the mom's ready and hungry. And so she'll go in but if we close the gate, then she gets all upset when she goes to go get them because she can't get back. So we have to go play, find the calves, and they're so great at hiding them and they just melt into the ground. It's so funny, and we'll finally get them all together. But after about a month or two, I open the gate. They just know exactly what to do. I'll call them. We don't have sheep right now, but when we had the sheep, I had a different call for the sheep, different call for the cattle. So I could call them, they'd come, I could separate the sheep and the cattle out. We do low stress. We use a Bud box. I'm trying to think, it's Bud Williams low stress cattle handling. There's a lot of different things that go into trying to keep it calm and quiet, and keep the animals in a low stress situation. But yeah, so that's kind of how, you'd asked me about the finances on it and, how to get it laid out. And that's how we kind of started this conversation. So a lot of that was incremental. And then after we had all the fences up to protect where the trees were going to go, well, then 2018 or 19, we got a grant from Department of Natural Resources. So I've written for a lot more grants, but of the ones I've got and the cost share through NRCS and stuff, we've gotten about $285,000 in help.
Where'd you learn how to write for these grants?
Just trial and error and asking your mom for help and, getting
those ag marketing specialists. You got to keep that in mind when you're trying to go get grants.
Asking people to review them and, make sure I was on track and had the right ideas. And anyway, but it takes time, it really does. And some of them I've written, you spend 20 hours of your time writing them and then they come back and say, oh, well, we're not doing regenerative projects this year. Well, why didn't you tell me that? And I would have never even bothered writing for it,
Right.
But again, it was practice, chalk it up. Well, I learned something. But anyway, so we did a lot of that. Well, and we did this DNR grant and we got $50,000. I think it was $52,500 in a one-time grant. We planted 7,500 trees to make a living hedge. And I belong to 4 or 5 different European English hedge laying groups on Facebook. And so essentially that's the way you had a fence back before you had barbed wire and wire fencing.
A natural fence.
It's a natural, you manipulate trees into a fence so that you could contain sheep, cattle, pigs, that sort of thing. And so there are hedge laying groups. They have contests and competitions. And I don't know if any of you watch Clarkson Farm, but
Season 2's out, right?
Yeah, season 2's out.
Our lead class was just talking about that on our Facebook page last
But if
night.
you look, they did a hedge laying competition on his farm this season 2. So
see, but he's farming with money.
That's all right. He's farming with money. Yeah. But anyway, I think what I like about his show is that I truly believe he wants to do it. He wants it to work. I think he loves it. But the challenge is obviously he's coming at it from the fact that he doesn't really know anything. Yeah. But he does highlight a lot of the just ludicrous things that happen to real farmers everywhere around the world when they're trying to deal with regulations, when they're trying to deal with neighbor relations. It's just some of the stuff we have to do that people just don't get. It's just crazy. But anyway, so just that they have that hedge laying competition. So that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to do here. And we got that grant. And so then those trees are now planted, and they're growing great, looking good. And so eventually what we'll do is we're going to have a hedge layer come over from England and they're going to lay them for us. And we'll do a program, with soil conservation and with Maryland Department of Ag and a bunch of the different organizations we'll have out.
Briefly, because I don't think we've talked about it before on this podcast, what soil conservation, like what they...
Well, every county in the state of Maryland and 2 in out Frederick and Catoctin, Frederick County has a soil conservation district, and they're there to help you. They were created back during the Dust Bowl years when it was so bad. They got the funding, and what they do is they help you to try and have better soil practices. Back in that time, it was just plow everything under and, plant or let it just be plowed. And you had huge amounts of erosion. You lost countless millions of tons of topsoil in very fertile areas. And so anyway, it was to try and stem the tide of that. And then other organizations like NRCS that we talked about earlier come and help with different practices. So I served as I was an associate. I served as a supervisor. I was a treasurer for a while for Howard Soil Conservation District. So
you're part of too many groups. That's your problem. You're so busy with what you're doing. You're just a part of too many groups. But so part of what you like what we've talked about so far, it it's amazing for what you're trying to do to protect what you have. The debate that people get into when I talk to them about what you do, but also sometimes what I think about, and you and I have had this discussion before on the phone. Like, I think what I like about you so much is that you're a person that you do what you do, but you respect anybody who farms in general, regardless of what their practices are. You don't judge, and you're willing, and you have an open mind where you understand, okay, what I do works for me, but it may not work for people elsewhere. The other question a lot of people have is what you do. So the big question is, like, is what you do feasible? Where if we tried to implement everybody do that, how do you feed the entire world doing those practices that you do? There's huge benefits to the soil, the environment, the production of the health and the profitability for your benefit. The quote I heard somebody tell me one time that they got upset. I think it was somebody in my lead class. One of the farmers told him, because Brian Ward, I don't know if I ever introduced you to him. He's
in your class?
Yeah, he's in my class.
I think I've met him.
They're in Prince George's County. Really cool. They do they have a dairy. They make their own cheese products.
Yeah. Really, I think I met him when I was at the class you had down in the Eastern Shore.
Yeah, great guy. I'd love to get him on one of these podcasts soon. But anyways, he said one time he was because he feels like a lot of times he's left out of these ag groups, that a farmer came up to him and said, what you do is great, but somebody's got to feed the poor people. So what I'm doing is feeding those who can afford it enough. So the question I have for you is what you're doing something we need to push more of on other farms? Or is it something that there's some practices that we need to implement and some of them may not work? Like, I guess the question is, where do you go from here with the conversations a lot of people have? We have 60 years left or 60 seasons left before we lose all the topsoil in the United States, right? And Maryland is so different because what we're trying to do is protect Chesapeake Bay primarily. That is like since I think 1980s, 1985, that is what our primary focus is. And what you're doing does that exactly to a T. It is, bar and none, one of the greatest practices you possibly could do in this state to protect it. Not only in your state, but if you did it elsewhere throughout, like Pennsylvania and New York. Yeah. But it always goes back to the question: how do you feed the rest of the world doing that? Like, are you producing enough of volume from those? And if you aren't, then what do you do?
Well, now we're going to go down the rabbit hole, everyone. Strap on.
That's
no. So I totally understand. So the challenge is, it's a broader discussion as a species.
As a human species.
Okay. So the challenge that we have is, and all this is my opinion, is how do you get people involved in feeding themselves? So right now, I think it's close. I think on one of the previous podcasts, I said less than 2%, or maybe the program I was doing earlier in the
less
week.
Than 1%.
2%, but I was just going to say, but I believe it's less than 1%.
It's less than 1%. Yeah.
But if you have only 1% of the population that wants to do this, or that is doing this, well, that's a big burden for 99% of the others that don't, if they don't want to do it, if they have no interest in doing it.
Big burden on who? The 1%?
On the 1%, but also the 99% if the 1% can't do it.
Yeah.
So if everybody was raising something on their own to their ability, that would change the conversation immensely. And I'll talk about this with various groups. If you go out and you try to garden, you'll buy your seeds. You're all excited. You're out there digging, you're planting. And one of the first things you're going to uncover is, well, why does that look yellow? Why isn't that growing right? And you're going to go and ask, and somebody's going to say, well, what did your soil test say? And they're going to do a soil test.
Most people don't even know what a soil test is. Like the common man's not going to know.
Right. But if they go to extension or they ask for help or they pick up a book, one of the things it's going to say oftentimes is, well, what does your soil test say? You got to get a soil test. And of course, if they're going to get an education on, well, wow, I'm trying to grow X and it's low in this. And well, now how do I get it? How do I get that into my soil? It's not there.
So briefly explain, when they're looking at a soil test, what are they looking for essentially?
Well, I mean, obviously it depends what they paid for, but your nitrogen, your potassium, your phosphorus, your calcium, those types of things, your pH level, is it high? Is it low? Your organic matter, are common in most basic soil tests. Is the soil structure? You can have your soil conservation district or, your extension folks come out and help you with what your structure's like. Well, now suddenly, welcome to our world. Now we have a soil test, and now we need to somehow amend our soil to whatever we're trying to grow. So, well, how do you do that? What are you going to buy? How expensive is it?
Yeah.
Well, then the next thing that's going to come is they got through that. Well, now what's this that's eating my plant? What the heck is going on here? Why is it a thing? Well, welcome to pests now, So then they're going to go to extension or they're going to call and say, hey, I've got this thing. What is it? And they'll try and figure out, well, okay, it's this. Well, how do I get rid of it? Well, can you pick them off and drown them in soapy water, or do you got to spray them with something? Well, now welcome to the world of pesticides and pest management and integrated pest management. Well, then you got through the soil issues and you got through the pest issues and you're dealing with that. Well, now the deer came and ate your plants. Oh man, now what do I do? Well, now you might need to have fencing, or you got to put something up to keep the deer out. Then a hailstorm comes along and tears up all your plants and rips your garden up. By the simple act of doing something like a garden, now we've expanded the conversation to where an average human being can understand what other folks are talking about that do this for a living. It truly puts them into, well, and then suddenly they realize, well, holy cow, I spent $2,000 raising this garden. I could have bought $2,000 worth of stuff at the grocery store for this. What the heck was I doing? This is the most expensive vegetables I've ever eaten, you know? Well, suddenly it's a whole big education, right, in that thing. And now I can have a conversation with someone that's went through that, because they actually can they can now grasp it in their own life with their own effort. I was talking to my eye doctor the one time, and I was explaining about how, imagine working and doing everything you were supposed to do. You showed up, you worked 60, 80 hours a week all year long. Yeah. And then a hailstorm came, and now you're not getting paid anything for that year, or you're getting paid a fraction of what you should have for that year. And she was like, oh my God, you're right. I'm like, yeah, exactly. I'm like, that's what's the scary part of what we do and the things that we have to be careful of. So anyway, I forget what we started with on this.
So you're
which part we were at.
So are you essentially saying that people have become too reliant on the 1% feeding?
Well, yes, that's right. You asked me about, can we do it? I think we can, but people have to take responsibility in some part for feeding themselves. Also, that's kind of almost saying like, well, you're just gonna have to put in work when nobody wants to work. Well, no, but so that's what I'm getting at. So when people say, can this work? Yes, it can work. I can raise way more on my property than I am right now, but we don't have processing capacity in the state. And so part of the challenge is the behavior of the general population. If they were raising some things on their own, it'd be a different conversation. They could contribute. We could have better understanding and knowledge when we try and express what we're having to deal with. If they don't want to do that, I can do it, but now the problem is they didn't shop at the butcher shops. So all the butcher shops went out of business. The ones that are still alive are the ones that found their niche and they're out there. But the problem for me is when I go, I can't get anything processed from July through the end of the year because once fair season of 4-H kicks in, I'm done.
Yeah.
So what I have to do is I have to set dates.
Processing meat. You mean, right?
Processing meat.
Yeah.
I have to get dates a year or two in advance. Animals aren't even born yet. And I've got to get the dates that I may have animals. Now, if you look at the big production places like Purdue and that kind of thing, they have it to the day when those chicks went in and when they're going to be done and when they're going to the processor. They're not going, oh, well, the pig's ready, but I got to wait 2 months to get a butcher date.
Mount Air's running 400,000 chickens a day.
Right. And so if I have to wait 2 months to get a butcher date, or I had to set it a year in advance, and now that pig, it's kind of sort of ready. It might not be full size, but it's where we are, and those are the dates we get. It makes it very hard as a smaller farmer or small producer that doesn't have the backing of some large facility to be able to make that happen. Mm-hmm. So we have to either fix those things, which I've been working on for decades now, and we're not any closer to fixing them. They got I think $63 million in Howard County during the pandemic. Every county got a slug of money, and we could tie it back to soil health. And we went with 10 proposals, and they rejected all of them. Yeah. And one of them was, for some sort of helping with doing meat processing, to get a facility in. We don't have a tri-county council. We don't have a SMATIC. So tri-county councils, I don't know, I'll let you explain how they work. But anyway, we don't have a tri-county council in the center of Maryland.
I don't want to talk about tri-county council. Well, I shouldn't say I don't want to. It's
Southern Maryland Agricultural
SMATIC, Southern Maryland Agriculture Development Commission is great. So I have no, Shelby does an incredible job with them. I have no problem. The only challenge I have there that when we did our tour down there was, so you have a SMATIC that runs it, but you also have AMPS, Ag Marketing Program Specialists, who are both competing for the same money coming from the state. So farmers I've had down there say, well, these grants they give out, these little $2,000 grants, what am I going to do with $2,000? I get there's stuff you can do, but again,
but it's but when I need a production facility that's going to cost $2 to $3 million to build, not including land price, and then some business is going to have to foot those loans for at least, they're going to have to cash flow it for 10 years. Yeah, they need customers to actually come there. Well, if the customers don't come, they're going to the regular grocery stores. Well, they're not going to do it. And then you have we're just talking obviously about meat production right now, but, you need the skilled labor. Doing this it's a skill. It's a doggone, it's a profession unto itself to be a butcher and do it well. Well, you have to have the way to do it. Well, we tried to work with Howard Community College on their culinary school to be able to train people. But, again, nobody wants to take the first step. So we don't have enough production capacity. So 2020 was our best year ever because we had our dates. We got all our stuff done. When the pandemic hit and the grocery stores locked up, we had meat available. We had no problems. We were able to donate some to the food banks to help them out because I think the numbers that they told me, they had a 90% drop in donations, which is primarily from grocery stores. And they had a 400% increase in demand. So we were able to help them out. But then 2021 came, and July of 21, the earliest butcher date, all my animals were ready. The earliest butcher date I could get was the end of 2022, which was just had. Mm-hmm. So I would have had to carry those animals for a year and a half in order to be able to get, a customer's not going to wait a year and a half for a pound of bacon. And I can't afford to carry and pay these fully sized animals for a year and a half. Yeah. So anyway, these are some of the challenges. So we can do a lot of this stuff, but where are we going to get the workers?
Well, that's,
where do we get the workers? If the people don't want to work in the fields, if I'm switching to a regenerative system where I'm raising that stuff out there, I'm going to need some people out there.
Yeah.
Help. Now, there's huge advances made in robotics, and I won't get into that part, and maybe we can do it with that. I don't know. But that's where the challenge that I see is, you don't want me to swear on here, do you?
No, you can swear.
I don't want
shit, whatever you want to say. Hell, that's fine. We don't listen. This isn't about being PC.
Well, you know I swear, and so I've been really good. I haven't said one bad word all this whole time, so that's a victory for me.
Fuck, Keith, just say it, man. What are you holding back?
Well, what I say is this isn't fucking Burger King. You don't get it your own goddamn way. So that means you can't, as a citizen, ask me to grow all your food, cheap bottom basement as I can, provide all your energy, because we got to have solar all over our farms too to give everybody energy. I got to raise your fiber for your clothing, your building materials. And oh, by the way, you need to roll back climate change. You need to reverse it and fix climate change on the entire planet.
Because you're the biggest problem. Like, according to them, we're the biggest. We're 1/3 of the.
But what was to just highlight that for a moment, we were all still farming when COVID hit and everything shut down. And lo and behold, the skies cleared, the air got cleaner, the water got cleaner. And you know what? The farmers were still farming flat out. It ain't us. We ain't the problem.
Easy, Keith. Easy, Keith.
That's all I'm saying.
You're debating against hundreds of years worth of scientific research that's really gonna.
Well, no, I'm just saying.
So
if everybody's got to drive down the road to get their Starbucks in the morning, well then.
So going back to my question, and I will give you an argument for what supportive of what you're saying, and then also.
Well, I guess what I want to say is I am not saying anything negative about production agriculture. I'm not saying anything about CAFOs or anything about it.
What's a CAFO? I don't know.
Well, I'll let you. Confined
Confined
feeding.
area feeding operation. Okay. There's only 12 in the state of Maryland that are like, and I think, or no, I'm sorry. I think there's only 12 dairies. I think a lot of poultry houses are considered CAFOs, but I'm thinking of dairies or maybe livestock. Anyways, CAFOs essentially were a bunch of animals. I think it's more than. There's like a specific number of how many head of cattle are confined within a certain square feet. I'd have to look it
when
up.
People get wound up, usually they're showing pictures or trying to talk about things with CAFOs is what I've usually experienced.
Yeah, Humane Society and PETA really hates this podcast.
They get upset. And so the issue that I have, and I want you to finish your statement there, but the problem that I have is there seems to be an understanding that you're either for regenerative ag or you're against the universe and you want the planet to die. And that I'm not of that mindset. I'm not at all.
I don't think you are.
The way I am doing things that I do is because that's the way I want to do them. I have friends, neighbors, relatives that all do everything in a different way or the only thing I'm trying to do is trying to come up with ways that folks can save money, potentially make their soil healthier, and do it all at the same time.
Yeah.
Trying to help with their environment. And if it works for them, that's fine. If it doesn't. So what happened was when people started talking about organic, now you bring up organic in a room and right away people's sphincters pucker and they get ready to have a fight. Because you can't have that conversation.
That's an evil no-no word.
Well, then we went the same way with regenerative. Suddenly it became, the devil, that we can't even have these conversations anymore. In certain circles, you can't even bring up climate change. So it's really hard. Everything becomes a silver bullet. It's either my way or the highway. You're with us or you're against us. I mean, it just goes on and on. Everybody wants to fight. That's not what I'm talking about here. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm telling everybody they have to do what I'm doing.
Oh no, I don't, and that's why I like you so much because you have that mindset of just because I do it this way doesn't mean The problem people have is there are people
all right.
who do practice what you do and say, this is the only way, or else we are going to die because we're going to kill the planet because everything I do is backed by all this research and data that says if we don't do it this way. And then you have the other side that says, well, there's plenty of scientific research and data that shows some of the practices I've recently implemented, no-till farming, cover crop programs, riparian buffer systems, stream bank fencing. That's kind of like one of those common sense things. Is like, oh yeah, if I keep the cattle out of if I give them a crossing area and then make sure I have a water system for them. Yeah.
But that costs money.
Money.
Where before they could just go to the stream. Well, now it costs money. Well, they want the farmer to bear that. So then there's cost share programs and other programs to try and help them.
But what I was getting to, so like in support of what you're saying. So I recently was scrolling through like some news reports and stuff, and I saw this funny news report. I don't remember who reported it, but it was about a legislator in England. Essentially, I think she was a House representative, or senator, whatever they call them over in England. She was going on a report recently about how with inflation, the cost of food has gone up drastically, 50% increase in general cost of food on your general like bread, milk, butter, cheese, your fruits and vegetables. And one of the comments she said is, well, if you're having trouble being able to afford your food, maybe just go ahead and work some more hours so you can get more money. And people freaked out when they like the comments on that. People were like, how dare you say this, that I have to work harder now? And so then I started reading a little bit more, and I started seeing like, big headline stories of major grocery suppliers, Whole Foods, asking suppliers to reduce cost of products at their stores. Because obviously the grocery stores are going to increase their costs when the suppliers increase their costs, right? Supply and demand, cost of everything, the cost is going to get passed down to the next group. The chain is going to work that way. The supply chain is going to work that way. Anybody can understand that. So you do make a valid point when you're saying, okay, if you want to save some money, if we're really going to implement some of these practices and really change the world, maybe we need to start teaching more people how to do these practices themselves. Maybe we just need to spend more time educating people how to grow their own food better. Maybe it's not as much as, telling somebody, hey, you need to go buy 20 acres of land and you need to do this, this, and that, and it's got to be exactly this way. Hey, on a couple of, 1 to 2 acres of land or half an acre, you can grow food like this. And when times get tough, this can supplement your food system. So that way you're not going to have to worry about it all the time when grocery store prices go up. Now, here's the counter argument to that. Going back to the point about, okay, grocery suppliers are complaining, Whole Foods or, other grocery chains are complaining to the suppliers that prices have gone up. Well, you would think that the increase in prices means that the farmers are getting bottom line, like, I know you're gonna laugh at that.
Oh, Ryan, sorry. Go ahead.
So it's like where I guess the question is, and I'm not an economist, and I'd love to get an economist on this podcast to talk about this. Where is like the break in the system, right? So if like obviously costs or prices did go up for wheat, soybeans, corn. Like when you were watching the grain markets, COVID, and then like into 2021, they were shooting up. It was, but the problem was then like fertilizer costs went up 50%. But going back to what I was saying was the counter argument to that is, okay, and I was reading about this in a book. So we've become so efficient with technology now, with how far we've come to be able to feed the world. I think one farmer can feed up to 158. It's probably more than that, 170 people a day. Where it used to be back in like the 40s and 50s, one farmer might be able to feed 25 people. I don't know the exact number, but it was huge difference we made just from the 50s up until now. Early 1900s. What were most farms using to plow the fields? They were using horses, they were using donkeys and mules. Then you have the tractor, combustible engine tractor comes along. Steam tractor engines were the first, but then combustible engine tractors go on. From like the 1930s on upwards, the difference in the amount of farms that owned horses versus the amount that owned tractors skyrocketed because they became more affordable. But that also meant that competition became higher, right? People got more efficient. People figured out more ways how to become better farmers, which made food come cheaper, which was going back to my point I talked earlier on this podcast. It made food cheaper for people, which is what people are complaining at right now as we speak, is that inflation has caused food cost so much. I can't afford to feed my family. I can't do this and that. So the thing you're talking about works in the sense that, yes, for people, it's good that if you want to be able to grow, food here and there, but in the long run, I don't think we can stop the amount of innovations when it comes to technological advances within the agriculture industry for what we do. When you talk about genetically modified organisms, when you talk about the use of different pesticides and herbicides, however your feelings may be on that in particular, there's a reason why people were researching that in the first place, because we had a problem. We need to come up with a solution for that problem. We did. It saved a lot of time and labor costs and efficiently, which in the long run reduced the prices of food. And we live in this excess food market now where people can, for the most part, afford what they're eating. So why would they? My argument against it is, why would they care to want to start something themselves when there's already people doing it 20 times better than what they might be able to do themselves? I don't have to put in the work. I should instead. Well,
they don't. They don't. They don't want to.
And I don't think they will.
Well, that's the challenge. That's really. So what I always say, whenever somebody says they have a simple solution, they don't know the problem. They don't understand the problem really. There is no simple.
Unless they're Elon Musk.
So when someone says that, again, you can't do this work sitting on your couch. You can't do this work playing on your devices.
Yeah, but Keith, I want to sit on the couch. Come on, man.
And so that's ultimately where the problem is. These are the people that are our voters. These are the general citizens that are electing our officials. These are the general people that end up passing these laws. If you want this stuff, it's not a free ride. I can't wave my magic wand and make it happen. It has to follow the natural laws in order for it to become a reality.
You have to work with us more.
And so if you want all this stuff to occur, then you're going to have to take some personal responsibility and make choices in your life to help us accomplish it. You could, my personal opinion, again, this is all my opinion. My personal opinion is we are overrunning the carrying capacity of the planet Earth.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning we have too many people. We are packing too many people because.
Have you read though that our population is actually decreasing
in certain areas, but we're still over 8 billion total.
Yeah.
And so where we're running into challenges is, we know from science that they say if everybody in the world wanted to live like we do here in the United States, the planet can't do it. But a lot of people are trying.
Why not?
Well, because we just don't have the resources. Well, I shouldn't say we don't have the resources. if you look at some of these, at archaeology and some of the ancient cultures, there was essentially a closed loop. So you raised something, or you hunted, you gathered, it went to the people, and then it went back into the land in some manner, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
We have it starts at the farm or the factory, it goes to the people, and then it goes to the landfill. So, like one of the things I've been working on for over a decade now is composting regulations to help with composting.
Let's get into
well,
that. No. Let's
Ron,
please.
Let me finish this for a second.
I know, finish that, but then I want to get into that because I remember.
So why in any sensible head should it take this many years to get something so simple as composting when it wasn't even a thought? There's 40 centuries of documented history of composting in China.
Mm-hmm.
And we act like this is a brand new thing that no one's ever discovered before in the world. Like I said, my family, we always had a compost pile as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
This was not this should be a no-brainer. But in doing it, I know there's a lot of challenges with it, and a lot of the challenges come with how we want things done and what we believe is acceptable behavior. So when I'm spreading stuff out on my farm, I don't want junk in it. I want a nice, clean operation because I'm going to graze the animals across there, and I don't want pieces of plastic. I don't want chunks of whatever in it. Well, where does that start? It starts in the home. When they're collecting those materials to compost, they got to keep it clean.
Yeah.
I collected food buckets to feed to my livestock from various farms in the area. We would find diapers, dirty diapers, coffee cups, paring knives. They'd buy a cheap set of knives somewhere and just throw them away. Bottle caps, bottles, napkins, wet wipes, all manner of trash. If you get it from the store, I have to unwrap it. I have to take off the zip ties, the wire ties, the cupcake cups. I gotta make sure the little rubber bands that are into the bunches are taken off. Everybody wants to stick on those IPC scanner labels. I don't want my cattle eating that.
Yeah.
I don't want that clogging up their rumen and their internals. So I can't take it. And it's all because it's some convenience thing that's been done at the store to make it easier to get it out the door. That's fine. But now I can't get it back in the soil in a good way.
Yeah.
And so then, I'm a firm believer in the benefits of compost, but again, there's no reason to cover our ag land with solar panels if everybody had solar panels on their houses. They'd make their own electricity, and then I wouldn't have to worry about them.
What are you talking about, Keith? It's called solar farming. They're farming the sun, and they're getting a renewable energy resource that is protecting the environment and that is going to help us in the long run.
If everybody took a little responsibility for feeding themselves, we have a better thing. If everybody took a little responsibility, had their own little compost bucket that they did their compost in, then we wouldn't have to have a giant facility somewhere that stinks to high heaven trying to manufacture everybody's crap. The issue is, in my opinion, is folks want what they want when they want it. We got 1% that they want to have to deal with it. So you're asking for a heavy lift from that part of society is my, I'm probably going to, be canceled now or whatever for all that. But I'm just saying,
So you basically what you're saying is you don't like solar. You don't like to.
No, I think solar is a great idea, but don't stick it all on my farm because you don't want to take responsibility for generating your own power.
Yeah, but it's easy that way.
Well, sure it is because we're going back to 1% of the population.
Yeah, this goes back to what you and I were talking about.
Just
before.
shove it down their throats and, well, there you go. But you've kept the farmer poor and disenfranchised. So now you're going to offer them a lot of money to put solar on their land. Well, how do you say no to that?
In their mind, though, we've made millions off of these people.
We have,
and that like with the food prices, it's our faults that the food prices are
just stick it in my mattress.
Yeah.
all that money.
But so going back to
and I'm not trying to be mean. I just want people, like Colby mentioned in one of the other ones about critical thinking.
Critical thinking and creative writing.
When someone talks about these things, I just want them to think, how are they contributing to the problem and how could they help fix it? And that's where it gets really hard for me, because we got to start way back at square one, and someone has to be willing to accept responsibility.
Well, but that's always been, I shouldn't say us, that's always been the farmers. We've ultimately ended up being the ones that the responsibility has been put on to pick up the pieces that have fallen apart, right? And like Maryland's just one of the few examples since, and I agree with what I understand why they did it and why there was such an importance to protect the Bay, because the Bay plays such a crucial part into Maryland's economy, into the importance of how Maryland became the state it is today, the watermen that work.
Oh, I have no issues with the Bay. The again, what I'm trying to get folks to understand, like they did some studies, I think it was University of Maryland in Howard County. And it was, I might have it wrong, but I want to say it was like one of them was Wild Lake. And there's no agricultural land around it.
Mm-hmm.
But yet the lake was polluted. And when they interviewed the homeowners, they asked some questions about fertilizer, what they did with, how they managed their properties and all that kinds of stuff. And was there runoff? And everybody noticed that there was runoff on other people's properties, but not theirs. And it obviously the problems weren't coming from their place. Well, the lake was polluted and it wasn't agriculture. This was all residential. This was all on them. But nobody wanted to acknowledge that each of them was somehow contributing to that problem.
Because it's just easy. Like it's.
So how do I come in and try and help somebody and educate somebody? Because it's not only just education. Someone can give you good information, but if you don't listen to it, if you don't take action on it, like I'll say a lot, I use the freight train example. I can see someone standing on the tracks and I can see the train coming and I can yell to them that the train's coming. At the end of the day, they got to get off the tracks or not.
Yeah.
And as a side joke, I saw this one earlier in the week and I thought it was so funny. And I feel like this on a daily basis. So it said, the pessimist sees the dark tunnel. The optimist sees the light at the end of the tunnel. The realist sees the freight train coming. The train driver sees three idiots standing on the track. I said, I feel like that every day. I'm all those. I'm the pessimist, the optimist, the realist, and the driver of the train.
But I think that's so. I think that's a great perspective of like who we are as humans, right? We are always probably going to be so engaged in what interests us most and what matters to us most.
Sure.
We can't force people to care enough about like what they do or what their, what issues they've caused. But before we get too far off topic, a great example of that is I want you to talk about what happened in Howard County with the soil compost regulations. Because I remember growing up as a kid, the amount of meetings, like the county council meetings my mom was going to, and like just the nightmares that they would like she would have and like other people. And like, tell me a little bit about what happened there. Like, what was the issue, what people were upset about. Because I think that kind of relates to what we're talking about here.
Well, this was prior to the state composting regulations coming to be.
So the state legislature has it in now?
Yeah, we have composting regulations under Maryland Department of Environment.
Okay.
And this was prior to them. There was a working group that was working on it at the state level at the time. So our friend Jeremy Chris was one of the folks that were on there. There were a few folks that I was friends with that were on the actual working group. And anyway, that hadn't been finalized yet. And so we passed a bill regarding composting in Howard County, and it went fine until the first group started to try and do it. And
the first group, what do you mean?
Well, it was, I think it was a personality conflict between some neighbors. That's how it started. The properties that folks wanted to do the work on were in preservation programs. And
you mean like Maryland Ag Land Preservation?
Yeah, I think one was in MALF, Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation program, and then I think the other one was in the Howard County program. I might be wrong on that, but I think one was
briefly. We may have talked about it, but briefly describe how do you get how MALF works and how you get that money essentially?
Well, essentially you're selling your development rights on a piece of property so that it can't go into houses.
Stays agriculture.
Its primary use is supposed to be agriculture. Okay. You can have a MALF property or a Howard County property and not farm it. It can just be land, but you're not going to be able to develop it. You can't subdivide it and sell it into development, that sort of thing. And so essentially what they're doing is they're paying you, and I don't know about MALF, but I know in the Howard County program, and not every county has one. Has a program, and there's counties like Montgomery where they have a program, but they don't ever fund it. It seems like, in my opinion, they don't fund it enough anyway.
Dang Montgomery County, they're always hated. Doesn't matter where I go, Montgomery County.
Well, but I didn't have good experiences in Montgomery County, but I don't hate Montgomery County. I just say,
but yeah.
But anyway, but the interest was there to try and do it, and it became this big issue that essentially anybody that was wanting to do compost was trying to kill their neighbors. And
before you go further, what's the value of composting in the first place? Like something as simple as that. Somebody may know. Like, what's the value?
So what you're doing is you're taking organic matter. So, what all, tomatoes, lettuce.
Let's say you're taking food that's no longer able to sell at a store.
Yeah, it's something that it's not available. So there's a hierarchy that I like to talk about. And so obviously if a farmer is raising food, the first thing we want to do is get it to people that are going to be able to eat it. Whether you do that through direct to the consumer, a grocery store, a farmer's market, a food recovery program where its initial intention was to go over here, but it's still good. Let's get it to these folks over here.
Yeah.
Food bank, whatever. If we can't get it in a timely fashion at that level, the next level is livestock. Let's get it into an animal, something that can eat it. We're helping the system. Because
they'll eat just about anything.
But I mean, I wanted my animals to eat. I didn't want rotten crap. I mean, we wanted still edible stuff.
But they have a better digestive system where they could handle it.
Right.
Easier.
And so then the next level down is, well, can we get it in a compost? So where we're taking it, we're adding a certain level of what we call green material that has nitrogen and brown material that has carbon in a particular ratio. We mix it together. It'll heat up. The heat kills bad things that could potentially be a problem. Can kill seeds, weed seeds, that kind of stuff. And what you're left with is a material that has some nutrition or nutrient value for, not say of a level of fertilizer, but it has nutrients in it. Mm-hmm. And you test it and you can tell what those nutrient levels are. Some you can make, when you get really geeky about this, like I am, you can actually, modify your ingredients to get different types of stuff and get different types of compost that are good for certain things. But anyway, it's a good soil amendment. It can help with organic matter, water retention, carbon sequestration. There's a whole host of things that can help with it. And we use it a lot, and it's very beneficial. It helps with your microbes. You have these small critters in the soil, various bacteria, fungi, and they work together to break down things, and they're creating the living embodiment of what we might call these nutrients, but it's not a mineral nutrient. It's a biological nutrient. It's wrapped up in the life of this critter, what I call the soil critters. And anyway, so that's the benefit of it. So you're taking stuff that's going to end up in a landfill that's going to rot. Now, the big complaint about that is it can produce a high level of methane. And methane, the rotting material.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the rotting material that's out in the landfill can produce a lot of methane. Mm-hmm. Methane accelerates the greenhouse effect of sunlight coming into our atmosphere and makes the environment hotter.
Destroys, and that's why we had
layer. 80-degree temperatures 2 days ago, and now it's 30 now. Well, what the hell?
That was just a normal phenomenon. And you ever looked at a thousands of years chart? It's just a natural wave. We're just in a weird phenomenon.
Right. So anyway, so that's what compost, one of the benefits of it and why it's helpful. And so, anyway, it turned into a huge ordeal. I think we fought it 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I think it finally came in before the election in 18. It became an election issue. And I mean, the challenge with being in politics is if you have a population that doesn't understand an issue, doesn't want to understand an issue, and you have groups actively trying to put out misinformation, and you have people that aren't going to do that critical thinking and try and get to the root of what was said, well, then you have folks that they got to do what they got to do to get reelected. You know? And so the bill came out and, we did our best, but the bill that they were ultimately going to pass was so detrimental that it didn't make any sense to try and do it. Yeah. And so we told them to just pull the bill. So we ended up, theoretically we lost that battle, but ultimately they did pass the state regulations. And so that allowed farmers like me to still continue, but the two groups that were going to try and do what they wanted to do, they couldn't because it just wasn't going to go in the county.
And the complaint, if I remember correctly, was the neighbors were upset about the trucks that were.
Well, there were multiple issues. They were worried about. There were 7, and I got to try and remember if I can remember all 7.
7.
Yeah, there were 7. There was going to be air pollution, water pollution, dust, noise, odors, trucks, and fire. Well,
because from the gas being released.
Well, so during the course of the events and the meetings and the endless meetings and the more meetings and the task force and everything else, things would get skewed. So one point we'd be talking about compost, then we'd move over to wood mulch, and then we'd go back to compost, and they dance back and forth when it suited the purpose to complain about whatever they wanted to complain about. So what happens is and I'm highly critical of these people because I feel like we're not telling the truth and intentionally trying to scare the population.
Critical of the neighbors, or
no, the groups that were opposed to doing the compost. I feel like they did a total misjustice.
Can you say who the groups were?
No, I don't want to.
Come on,
I want to move on. Truly, I do.
Okay.
Not move on in the discussion. I just want to move on from that segment of my life.
Let's just say if you had to rhyme. No, I'm just kidding. You don't
No. So anyway, I will never understand that mentality, but it
wasn't really the neighbors that were. It was more the group.
The groups, then everybody jumped on the bandwagon because I think they were scared, and then again, if somebody doesn't know something, I mean, look at agriculture and what we see a lot that happens. You'll have a news article come out or something comes up and suddenly, whole swaths of humanity are terrified, but they don't really know the facts. And obviously, I don't want to hurt anybody. I'm not trying to do that. That's the whole against everything I'm trying to do on my farm and in my life. So, that was not the goal. What I'm trying to do is save their stupid lives and feed them, and they just don't understand that. So anyway.
Well, I think it's a simple way of, like, it's a right way, but that's a very simple way of looking at it versus what they probably look at it, right? Because for many years now, they've been led to believe that we're not trying to save them, that we're trying to poison them, that we're trying to kill them sooner rather than later, give them cancer, give them all these health issues, because a lot of the food we produce for them is been so chemically integrated and modified that it's just no longer good, and that anything you eat is going to kill you no matter what, right? It's like we've gone away from the practices that you do, obviously, now. So we're not helping people, we're killing them, because we're the bad guys. I shouldn't say bad guys, but we are the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems in their everyday lives, because food is essentially our everyday life, right? You wake up, the first thing you think about is what am I going to eat for breakfast? You want to eat eggs, you want to eat bacon, and then for some people, the thing they're going to think about, I want to make sure that egg is organically antibiotic, hormone free, no problem, every name and label in the book that they could possibly think of, they want to make sure that it's that, and they don't care what the price is as long as they can. Well,
I'm smiling and laughing because the one time I was sitting the booth at an event, and a lady came up and was very concerned about organic agriculture. She wanted to make sure that whatever she was buying was organic. And then she went to the booth next to me and was saying, I've got this old can of stuff in my basement. It's probably like 15 years old, and I have a fruit tree, and I was wondering if I could spray that on this fruit tree, and it was 7. And I was, I didn't know what to actually process there. I'm like, you were just so concerned here with me talking about organics, and then you go over there and we're wondering if this 15-year-old bucket of 7, you could just throw it on your.
It was 7?
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
From what she was saying, because I think it's called something like 7, and I was just sitting there like, I don't even know how to process all this in my brain, all the thoughts that are flying through. And
well,
I would go and sit a lot of booths for a lot of these organizations and try and help get the word out. And we always laugh because every single time I'd get yelled at and screamed at by somebody. Somebody would come up and lay into me for whatever was bothering them that day about agriculture. Well, and I almost made it one event. And in the last 10 minutes, the lady came up and started yelling at me. And I was like, doggone it, I almost made it through a whole event before I got yelled at. Like rats, I almost made it.
You're just a target.
I know.
You're like an individual specimen that's just so different from the rest of the entities out there.
No, because I would go to these events where you normally wouldn't see agriculture. And I would go to these events to try and get the word out and share the benefits and the things that we're doing, try and talk to people, educate them about what all farmers are trying to do.
Yeah.
And so, of course, if I'm the one they see, I'm open target.
Yeah.
And so, but
you fit the pattern of what a typical farmer would look like too. Because I'm just saying, you wear overalls all the time. You got the beard. You're going bald on the top head.
I had a full head of hair before I started getting yelled at all the time.
I know. And
I'm kidding.
You're wearing a hat, and so you fit that stereotype.
And that's all right.
And it's easy to target you because you're just that.
But the challenge with the general population is, and I understand, is if you're in the middle of the city, your family's been raised in the city. You were talking about it in other podcasts. You're 3, 4, 5 generations removed.
Generations.
For some, it's even more.
Yeah, probably. But the average, I think, is 3.
And you don't know a farmer. You don't have any connection whatsoever. Well, how are you supposed to get any quality information that you have any idea is even remotely true or accurate? So I get it.
Listen to Bulls in a Barn podcast. No, just kidding.
Well, I truly get it. So it's not like I understand what's causing it. The challenge is, how do we fix it? Well, we did farm academies. Your mom was very involved with the farm academies that we do. We'd have legislators, we've had the general population out to our farms to try and expand that. We, try to get it back in the school systems. We've done programs at every level to try and get that, change that, but it's not changing, I think, fast enough in a high enough degree that it worries me.
Yeah.
It worries me. It absolutely does.
Do you think in Maryland we're going to really see, we ask this question all the time, where is Maryland agriculture going to be 20 years from now? Do you think we'll be able to look where we're sitting today, and we'll be able to look back 20 years from now and say, we did everything we possibly could to educate people about the value of keeping Maryland farms, the value of why we need locally sourced produce food, why what we do is not actually so harmful for the environment. I guess my simple question is, what do you think is going to happen? Where are we going to be 20 years from now within Maryland agriculture? Do you think people are going to be more educated about the value and importance? Do you think people are getting better educated, or do you think we're too late to the game where trying to reach out to people and better make them aware of the value and intricacies and the complexity of the Maryland ag industry, that we've missed the mark and the game's over?
Do you want to keep this a positive podcast, or do you want to have people happy? Do you want to have them crying?
I want your honest opinion. Cause that's the reason why. Why ask this question? All right. Because a reason I asked is a prime example. I remember a meeting we were sitting at. I was sitting at 2 summers ago. And the question came up of, how do we get more young farmers to become farmers? How do we get more young people? How do we help young farmers, right? And the number one, everybody had great ideas, great different thought processes. We need to get grant programs that give them money to be able to purchase farms. We need to set up leasing program or land leasing programs where the price is set at this for a young farmer, so that when somebody owns that land, they don't try to skyrocket up the leasing prices so that young farmer has a chance. And we've been talking about this. The one thing that was all connected was money, right? Money, and then the fact that there's no accessibility. And like Colby mentioned it on the last podcast, we've only got so much land. Once we run out, that's it. We're done. So where are we going to be 20 years from now?
Well, so I am actually a happy person. I have a great life.
Very happy person.
I have a great life. So I don't want anybody to, think I'm suicidal or anything like that. So just, I'm all right. The challenge is the pandemic. The pandemic really hit me, and my belief in the good of man and humanity really took a hit.
How so?
Over the pandemic. Well, for one thing, for as long as I can remember, farmers said, one day the grocery stores are going to run empty. And people are going to realize how important we are, and it's going to change the way they behave and the way they treat us and the way they think. And it happened. And as soon as, and suddenly people were coming out, oh, you're a farm. I can buy stuff from you. Oh, it's great. This is the best thing ever. Oh, I'm so happy you're there. And thank you for all you do. And it was great, And as soon as the grocery stores had food again, the vast majority of those people left, and that was it. The other thing, this was a personal, when everything started to happen, I told my family, I said, listen, we're only going to take what we need. We're not going to stockpile. We're not going to clear out the shelves, because there's other folks that need food out there and toilet paper and whatever else. So we're going to just take what we need. And because I thought mistakenly that humans would be respectful ultimately, in the ultimate test of humanity, they would be respectful to each other, take what they need and try and share and be, and I was wrong. Things got stockpiled and cleared the hell out. And I screwed my family because then we were without, because I had said, well, we gotta help other people. We got to make sure other folks have what they need. Well, then came the whole issue with vaccines and masks and all down that rabbit hole of how people cared about each other.
I don't want to go down that because I'm not a doctor.
But so
it's funny.
So all those things that I had thought, well, when push comes to shove, we'll really band together as a community, as a country, as a state, as a whatever, and we'll look out for everybody. And that was maybe my naivete, my hopes and dreams. But I really thought we failed as overall as a species when all that happened. I thought we did a shitty job of managing it. Well, so my concern is that I don't know that we're going to, as a species, make it another 100 years. We might not even hit the end of this century.
Wow. You heard it here, folks. We got.
So I mean, you wanted me to be honest.
No, I want you. I appreciate that. Why do you think that?
Well, because again, 99% of the population doesn't want to do anything. They don't want to take responsibility for their actions. They don't want to behave differently. They don't want to shop differently. They don't want to spend their money in a different way or take any kind of responsibility for their contributions to what goes on. We've got, I as a ship's officer, as a sailor, as traveling around the world, I've seen war, I've seen famine, I've seen people just treat each other horribly. I've seen climate change. I can go to places where there's now flooding, there's glaciers that are gone, there's things that are bad. If the projections that they're giving are even half right, we're going to lose probably half the eastern shore to subsidence, flooding, saltwater infiltration.
There's some people though that feel like what's happening over there, and this is not my opinion, because I when we were learning about it, when we did some studies on the shore, that what's happening has been going on for years.
Oh yeah,
Their grandparents were dealing with it before we were dealing with it, and they feel it's more of a natural progression of where, when we had a Pangea system and all the continents were connected, and of course, naturally over time, the water is going to overtake some. You build a house right on the beach next to the water. Sure. Of course, your house is eventually one of these days. But continue. I don't want.
Well, no. It's just so. If you look at now, a lot of the reservoirs are having a good hit with these storms that have come out west. But the trend in the west is a more drier half of the country. They're worried about the Colorado River, how people are going to be able to do stuff.
California is running out of water.
I think it's going to be a severe change and impact on our ability to produce food. We have to be more resilient across larger swaths of weather patterns, and how we do that. And maybe the way that we do it is with Petri dish meat and, veggie burgers and whatever. Well, all I'm saying is I think with all that, and then you chalk on the fact that Russia decides to invade other countries, and China, we have our generals saying that we might be in a war with China in the next few years, and you have China floating balloons over top of us and doing all sorts of stuff. We don't have a history as a species of doing this stuff well. We just don't. And now we have weapons that are way more potential for devastation than we did before. And so I have genuine fears that when areas start to run out of the ability to feed themselves and have clean water to drink, you got starvation, you got other things. I think it's going to be a problem.
What about in Maryland particularly, though? Where do you see it going?
The interesting thing that I keep trying to tell people is if you look at the projections, Maryland fares well in that we'll have a good climate and good water that we'll be able to grow a lot of stuff. But not if you build houses on everything, cover it with solar panels, and don't take care of the farmland that's there.
Yeah. So,
because if you think of a farm as an ecosystem, and I don't know what the tipping point is, but eventually, if you take away, like when the grain facilities closed down, when the, Ellicott City, the mill that was there for 100 whatever years, they made condominiums.
Lothian Mill. And
Lothian out there, the various support systems that go down. Well, when you lose all that, there's a certain point where I can't drive 200 miles each way to go get something that I need. And if I got to take my crops there and they know they're the only game in town, well, they don't have to overpay me or pay me a fair. They can pay me whatever they want, And so that's.
But that goes back to the point I made earlier about the efficiency and like the ability to thrive on, like JT, who sits on this podcast, does a great job of making that argument. Like, we're going to have to accept the fact that there's a difference between good and great farmers, and ultimately the ones who are finding ways to adapt. Like, I am a firm believer that adapt, thrive, and survive, right? Times are always going to change. We're always going to be and have to find new avenues to run our businesses, run our personal lives, whatever the case may be. You're just going to have to, like, if you're not able, you're going to have to find a way to adapt. And if you're not able to, you're going to fall behind. And I'm not saying that because I want to see farms disappear. Or I want to see farms fall behind. I want to see the farms we have now stay sustainable and stay for another 100, 200, 300 years. I just don't see a lot of people willing to innovate or improvise or like come up with new solutions because they don't feel like they should have to, because they'd rather just push back against the, what's that song? Oh God. Fight against this. I can't. It's an old
Rage Against the Machine.
Rage Against the Machine. That's what I was. They'd rather just fight against the system.
53 years old, folks. Yeah. We're pulling that out, man, right there. Younger guy didn't know it.
You're showing the difference in age. It's fine. That's fine. I know my stuff. You know yours.
I'm just teasing.
But my point is that, like, you're just not. I just don't see people. They'd rather fight. Like, especially in the United States, we're known as fighters, right? Like, we'd rather hold our ground to the very end until that point. So getting to my point is that, like, you're going to have winners and losers. And yes, you're correct. Unfortunately, we're going to run out of options for people to be able to have a viable supply chain or affordable position where they can take their food supplies to, or they can make sure that their supply is being sold at properly. I am an optimistic. I will be the counter-argument to your.
I hope you are right. I mean, I truly, truly understand. I got two beautiful daughters that I love with all my heart, and I want nothing for the best for them. And I just hope I'm wrong. It's one of those things when I look at all these things, and sometimes I wonder if it's the algorithm on my phone is feeding me all the bad news articles.
I think it's
and
the
then
algorithm.
I worry that I'm not getting enough good and optimism. But the funny story is, I had subscribed to this magazine years ago called Positive Thinking Magazine, and it went out of business because not enough people subscribed to it.
Well, you look at most news. You make a good. I mean, this is what a lot of people on like podcasts and news channels talk about. Most of the news today is people only want to see the bad stuff because it's more entertaining. Like, it's nothing fun about talking about somebody who did something awesome, or like, shows like Maryland Farm and Harvest is a prime example. Everything they do on there is very positive. Yeah. It's like this farm does this amazing and incredible thing, and it's like they're an awesome organization, yada yada. Yeah, but you never like. I wonder what the numbers are like these days, because I doubt most people, like, they'd rather see like, oh my God, Russia invaded Ukraine, or oh my God, we have the world's biggest like, they care more about that stuff. Yeah. But I'm trying to be more optimistic these days, because going against some of the points you made, I do see more people who are self-aware about the food they're purchasing. I see more people self-aware about taking care of themselves. I will support what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast for you, saying that I think there are more people who are interested in finding ways to grow their own food, protecting the environment, and being more environmentally conscious of what they're trying to do. My argument is the farmer's been doing it for hundreds of years. Like you said, and you made a valid point, don't come after us. Put in some of the work yourself, and then if we're continuing to be a problem, then maybe work with us, right? But you made a valid point. Make sure you're putting in the work. And I actually do think I see more people putting in the work and time and effort to try and make a difference. Contrary to what I was saying, yeah, people are lazy. I think in general, people want to be a part of the solution. They want to be a part of the difference in ag, especially people my age.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the young farmers I talk to, they're like, yeah, of course I want to be an environmental steward on my farm, or I want to make sure that I'm buying products that are more sustainable, but I also want to make sure that I'm also supporting the farmers that have been feeding me for generation after generation and who have been doing these practices way before I've even considered it. I try to keep looking at that in a positive light because to me, that's the only way we're going to be able to move forward. Like I think, and then you were talking about when the pandemic hit, people were taking all their food, they were being selfish, but I also saw the side where people were donating.
Sure.
Where we had those milk donation drives.
Yeah, we donated a ton of food at the time.
Yeah, where people were going out and making dinners for families that couldn't afford it. People were bringing people into their homes that couldn't, that got evicted or weren't able to live somewhere. I saw the bright light of things and I said, wow, like this is what we could be and this is what we should be. And I think we're trying to do that. Yeah, the problems with the algorithms with social media and the news channels and the way they're feeding your system, I do think drains a lot of us mentally like we're always thinking negatively. The more I try to ignore that and the more I try to stay positive about where the outlook is, especially Maryland agriculture. And the reason why I asked that question, where do you see ourselves 20 years from now? It's kind of like a person who sits back and observes what's going on around them like, okay, I want to know what the wise people think where we're going to be because they've been through this for 50, 60, 70, 40 years. They've been through it already. They understand. They're a lot smarter than me, a lot more educated. They have a good understanding of where they've been active in everything they've been doing. They've paved the way for where we are today and where I'm standing today to be able to even do what, this podcast in the first place. So I'm trying to get an understanding of do they want us to keep fighting for Maryland agriculture? Do they want us to keep going forward? And I want them to say yes, but I also want to respect and appreciate opinions like yours where it's like, hey, not everything's perfect. And unfortunately, not everything's going to, there may be the other side of it where we have to be ready for, people just are shitty people and they don't really care about each other. And you're right. There are probably going to be places where they're going to run out of a sustainable food system and a supply chain, and then it's going to be survival of the fittest. And you made that one of those comments early in the podcast where you say, well, if you had just supported us farmers and listened to us a little bit more, maybe we'd be able to feed you. I think in general, Maryland agriculture is going to thrive so long as we, the next generation, are willing to keep doing stuff like this. And I've talked about it before on this, and I'm going to say it again. I hate when people say, we should use social media more to advocate for agriculture. Well, then fucking do it. And I don't mean that in a mean way. Then fucking do it. And that was the reason why I thought of this podcast in the first place. I got tired of people like kids coming out of school and myself, like I was even that stupid idiot where I was like, we got to use social media better. We got to use Facebook, Twitter, stuff like that. Then great. Then let's actually do it. Let's just like, and you and I talk about this a lot. We're tired of people just making the conversations and sitting on committees and boards and saying we're going to do this and then no action happens. Just, can we please every once in a while just go start doing it for once? Or maybe go out there and have conversations like this where we're just trying to figure out, we're not going to answer the world's problems. I know that's not going to happen, but we're at least taking the first step forward. And that was to me the biggest drive of where I'm getting at here, where I do see a positive light, because I think if there's people like me, and I know there's more people like me who want to see a difference, then why not think that there's hope, Well,
and that's where I try to figure out, how do you put this in words, how I feel. So that's why I gave that freight train.
I like that. Yeah, I like that analysis.
Type thing, that I feel like that every day. Because when you tell someone, well, you don't think we're going to make it, the first thing people want to know, and I mean, you've known me long enough, I'm trying everything to help in my personal life, out in the community. Well, if you really feel like we're not going to make it 100 years, then why do this? Mm-hmm. What is wrong? How do you have that cognitive dissonance where you keep trying everything, but you believe we're not, And the best way that I can try to explain it is, as a ship's officer, if there's a fire on board and we're in a hurricane, and your safest place is on that ship. But if the ship is going to sink and you got to get the crew off, well, what you have available, depending on the circumstances, you may only have a 5 or 10% chance of success. But you're going to go and you're going to do your best effort to try and save the crew. So I view it kind of what I call the peaceful warrior. If you ever imagine a warrior, like there's 3 of you and there's 1,000 people on the other side, and it doesn't look good. Yeah. It doesn't look good for the home team, but you still go out, you give it 100%, everything you have to try and make it happen. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I may be wrong. I'm hoping that, but I'm going to give it every effort I have to try and help with the solutions, to try and put good ideas out there, try and help young people that want to get into farming, that are already in farming, try and give them options that maybe they didn't think of, that might save them money and help them do things. Transition planning, estate planning, tours, meeting with legislators, going on these programs.
The advocation for legislation. I know you get frustrated a lot with it because.
Well, but again, it's just because it's so slow. These 3 bills that I worked on, we finally got the one for the tax credit in Howard County fixed. It was 5 years. The other 2 that I'm working on, 10 years and 5 years that we're trying to work on. And I don't view these as, these were not complicated, intricate bills.
Yeah.
It takes so long for even the simplest things sometimes. And so it's not, like I said, I'm on a winning streak. If we get all of these 3 passed, man, I should just retire and be done, go out on a winning note, but that's part of the challenge, is a lot of this stuff, it takes so long to do. And I'm just like, can we just move things along here?
Well, but that kind of goes to the change in we want instant gratification.
It's not even instant gratification, but just some of the stuff, some of these programs, for God's sakes, you say you want us to fix X, Y, and Z. I'm giving you clear-cut, proven programs that'll work, and you don't pass the bills. Yeah. You don't move it along.
It's a common sense thing. You think.
We want to cut greenhouse emissions by X, by such and such. But you don't put any programs in place to do that. You'll enact, let's do a working group. Let's do a here's a compost bill where we can do that.
Yeah.
10 years ago, we could do that. Nope. got to putz around with it for a decade. And then after a while, we'll get into it now.
And
that's the part that infuriates me.
And by that point, you could have been sold the farm and retired. And yeah,
I could have been doing it on a larger scale this entire time,
Do you think something like this, like one of the former senators, Mac Middleton, Charles, he was talking about how they used to do fireside chats when he was in Annapolis, and he would just invite people in, and they just have open conversation. He says you don't really see that anymore. Do you think more of this, like where if, like, for example, I started inviting some of the, or like somebody just started inviting some of the Maryland legislators to come in and say, okay, you proposed this bill or were against this bill. Can you explain why, what your thought process was? Maybe just having those open conversations with them, like across each other, where we say, can you just explain what your thought process is? And reason being I say that is maybe that's what could help us more, is understanding their thought process by just simply having them come in and explain it, whether they're honest about it or not, but try and get them to come into a relaxed, kind of comfortable environment and say, look, why did you think this bill, why didn't you push to get this bill passed? Or why did you feel like this bill needed to be passed in the first place? Why do you oppose animal livestock industry or CAFOs? What is your big opposition? Where are you getting your data and science from? If, taking the time to actually sit there and just have simple conversations like this, maybe that's what we need more of, is like having them come in and talk to us and say, can you just tell us why? So that we can get a better understanding of where they're coming from. Because it's like you said, we're 3, 4, 5 generations removed. It's an educational gap, right? It's a misinformation gap. So could it be as I shouldn't say simple, but could a step in the solution of the process be that we have more open, we go back to something that's a little old school, kind of like regenerative agriculture. We have open conversations.
Well, what I'll say, so my background, I have a bachelor's degree in public policy from Penn State. And I served I did a legislative fellowship at the House of Representatives in the state of Pennsylvania when I was in college. And then he was the minority whip, Mark Cohen. And then I did an internship with the Senate minority whip, Michael O'Pake. And then I was elected borough councilman in the state of Pennsylvania in my town. And I also served as clerk of elections up there. So what I would say is, first of all, do whatever you think is best. My own personal opinion on it, because I may be wrong. So I just want you to understand. My personal opinion is you have better chance of having that honest conversation off the podcast in individuals, because when you get it in the record and it's now recordable, now it becomes fodder for anybody that wants to attack them if they change their position. So a lot of times,
but that's the value in this, though, is that
and I'm saying I might be wrong. So I'm saying don't let what I'm saying dissuade you. I'm just giving my opinion is, so there's a couple things. One, not that Pennsylvania is the epitome of all that is legislatively wonderful, but what I will say, I think it's absolutely ridiculous and laughable to pretend that our electors are part-time folks and that we can cram ass a legislation in 3 months. Yeah, half the time when you try to talk to anybody down there, the first thing they say is, listen, we got 2,000 bills. I got 90 days. I don't have time to get into whatever. Then do a year-round legislature, pay the damn people like they deserve to be paid, and stop pretending like we have anything otherwise. And then that way, these bills don't have to be done in 30 seconds, and maybe we can take some time to do it. Now, is there problems up in Pennsylvania that you feel like things never get done because it takes forever? Absolutely.
There's problems everywhere. There's problems in the federal government.
I think it's just laughable that we pretend that these are part-time folks and that we can just do all these complex bills in 90 days. They don't even have a chance to read them on a human level. So that's things, having done some of this and worked in these environments, that I think would be a huge help to Maryland in the legislative process. And I'm sure folks would disagree with me and, whatever, but I think that would help to begin with. But then what I try to do is on a yearly basis, not during session, I try to build those relationships when session is over and have these conversations and try and have these discussions. And oftentimes, when the folks are being honest, and usually they are, I have no reason to doubt them. They might agree with you, but politically they have to vote in a certain way.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, either because that's what their voting public, in their district wants them to do. So they have to do it in order to get reelected. It could be a leadership decision that this is the way they said they wanted them to go on this bill. And if they need to get their stuff passed, they need to go, in that direction. It's anybody's guess, but they'll, I've had legislators tell me, hey, listen, I had to do this because I needed to get the votes in order to do something else that was important to me. And I get it. I understand. That's our legislative process. That's what they're doing.
I want to say, I don't think any of them are bad people. Like Colby said on our last podcast, I don't think.
Well, I will share with you that I think almost all the leadership, except for the guy that I worked with, ended up in jail.
Oh my God.
So I'm not saying that they're all bad by any means, but I will say that there are some bad folks out there. So.
Well, but that's in any industry you work with. That's the whole conversation about like police officers, for example. But getting to what I was saying, I don't think any of them are genuinely bad people. I don't think they have.
Like Colby said, I don't think they hate agriculture, they hate farmers, and I don't think the general public wants to believe that, or they. Yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
But I wanted to wrap it up because believe it or not, we're already over 2 hours, Keith.
Holy crap, man! Sorry.
No, you're fine. This is kind of what we're trying to do more of. We're trying to. We don't have enough time in an hour to and we could do this for 6 hours if we wanted to. And really,
I know we could.
But I wanted to read one of your things you wrote on here because I thought it was kind of interesting because it's funny because you were talking about being a pessimistic person, but your major life purpose was the exact opposite. So you wrote down, I wake up each day and count my blessings. I live my life in the bright sunshine and fresh air of an intentional life. I spend time helping people to realize and then to reach their full potential. Yeah. I love that last ending because I will say this because I didn't get a chance to say it at the beginning of the podcast. You were part of the inspiration for this podcast. You were the push for this. For what I was trying to find in my potential is of trying to be a difference in Maryland agriculture. You probably should have been the one that started this thing and got this thing going because you probably will do a much better job than I would. And I don't know if that, I don't know where I'm going to be 10 years from now from this, with this thing or anything like that. But I do know I appreciate what you've done for me, what you've done, your willingness to not just sit down and let people speak out against you, whether they're for you or against you. You've always been a person that stood for what you believe in, no matter what. And you've always also been a person that does not take offense when somebody doesn't always believe in what you're trying to do. And I think that right there shows that you're more of an optimist of what the future looks like than you realize. And I appreciate that about you. And I will always value that with you as a friend and as an individual, because I think, hey, yeah, there's some doom and gloom with everything going on in the world right now and where Maryland ag is going to be, especially when you look at, the continued increase in regulations. But I think if more people continue your life purpose, helping other people realize their full potential, I think the simple, not trying to say it's a simple solution, but I think that would definitely make a difference in how this, how better this world could be. Because I think everybody's trying to reach their full potential, right? Whether it's in Maryland agriculture, whether it's in just their everyday lives and purposes. We're all trying to make a difference. We're all trying to do the best job of our abilities. It may not always be perfect, but we're trying, and I think that's what matters, which is why I try to be more optimistic, because I see people working every day, and I know that people are trying. So I appreciate that from you, and I just wanted to say that on here before we wrap it up. But did you have, like, I know you brought some books that you wanted. Do you have, like, any piece of advice you want to give young people in Maryland ag or just ag in general, or things like you recommend they should read up about or learn more about before we end?
Well, I guess, thank you. I go back to what I said before. When people hear me talk about these things, then they think that I'm, a pessimist, or I'm, and that's not the case. I'm just processing information as it flows in. And
you're just the grumpy old gray wise man.
No,
that's what.
Not at all. But so the thing is, if anybody has any questions, if anybody wants to talk about anything, I can share, I can help in any way. I truly want to do that. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. And
it says it on your major life
I know,
purpose.
but also, trying to encourage you guys, other folks, if, and I don't care if you're 8 or 80. I really don't. It's not an issue, and I don't care what kind of farming you do. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying to help people get wherever they want to go and try and save our species, literally. There's a couple books that I've found really important in my life. Hold on a second. Let me get out here. And they're not necessarily agricultural books. The one, and I don't get any money from the sale of these books, but
no, I'm not getting any money either.
One is it's Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez, Your Money or Your Life.
I'm gonna have to read that one. I'll have to.
The other one is Julie Morgenstern, Time Management from the Inside Out. I think that's a good one for time management. This one is The Lean Farm, How to Minimize Waste, Increase Efficiency, and Maximize Value and Profits with Less Work by Ben Hartman. When people say, well, what are 3 books that you really, have found beneficial in your life? Those 3 are really impactful to me. If I had to pick 2 more, one is Brian Tracy, Goals, How to Get Everything You Want Faster Than You Ever Thought Possible.
Yeah.
And then the last one is from the founders of Zingerman's, Ari Weinzweig. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but it's Managing Ourselves. And the thing that I talked about with my family, before I came out here was, well, how much do I share about some of these feelings that I have? And the issue is I truly have a wonderful life. That list that I gave you that you read my major life purpose off of, it's very hard to sit there and say, I have an awesome life and I love everything. I've accomplished what I wanted to do, and then be worried that we're going to survive the next 100 years. It is cognitive dissonance, and it is hard to process, but I truly have a wonderful life. I really do. And I'm grateful for that. And that's why I try to be a steward of all these wonderful gifts that I've been given and try and give back. So.
Well, I appreciate that, Keith. And, I appreciate you doing this. We're definitely going to have you back. Hopefully, it'd be funny if 4 or 5 years from now, we have you back on and you say, you remember that conversation we had about
I've changed my mind.
Yeah,
things have changed. We're good again.
I hope that maybe something happens that we can do. Like I said.
Well, I think if they, stand down the nuclears and, maybe
we're talking
back off a war, maybe we can.
Well, we're talking international. Let's just focus on where Maryland agriculture is going to be, and then we'll go from there, because that's a conundrum in of itself. I agree with you. We got to focus on making sure we're keeping this industry alive, the number one industry in Maryland. But Keith, always a pleasure, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. And
thank everybody.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for these episodes. Please make sure to like and subscribe to all our podcast platforms, YouTube. Check us out on our website, bullsandbarn.com, and we hope everybody has a great rest of the week and has a great life. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.